Good morning. Welcome to the May 2026 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce this morning's agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 4 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking that would propose to enhance the stir-shaken framework to combat illegal robocalls. Second, you will consider a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that would streamline and improve the FCC's broadband data collection. Third, you will consider a third report and order to modernize the disaster information reporting system. Fourth, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking seeking to comment on a high-cost modernization initiative to ensure access to next-generation services. This is your agenda for today. Today's first item is titled Enhancing Know-Your-Upstream-Provider Requirements and will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. Joseph Calichon, Bureau Chief, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief, when you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a further notice of proposed rulemaking that, if adopted, would take another important step in the fight against illegal robocalls. I'd like to thank the entire Wireline team for their hard work on this item, as well as our colleagues throughout the Commission for their contribution and review. Joining me at the table are Kara Voth, Deputy Bureau Chief, Jody May, Chief of the Bureau's Competition Policy Division, Chris Laughlin, Deputy Chief of the Bureau's Competition Policy Division, and Mason Sheffa, Attorney Advisor in the division, who will now present the item.
Thank you, Joseph, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This further notice of proposed rulemaking, if adopted, would propose to strengthen voice service providers' Know-Your-Upstream-Provider requirements so that they take more accountability for eliminating providers that enable robocalls from the voice ecosystem, and would enhance the stir-shaken caller ID authentication framework as a tool to combat illegal calls. The further notice would propose to establish baseline Know-Your-Upstream-Provider measures all voice service providers must follow, which consist of collecting specific information from upstream providers, evaluating upstream providers' compliance with certain commission rules, conducting due diligence to verify the authenticity of the information obtained, monitoring their upstream providers' traffic and practices, and refusing or discontinuing service when a holistic evaluation shows an upstream provider is not a legitimate entity or is likely to be the source of illegal calls. The further notice would also seek to strengthen the stir-shaken ecosystem by proposing stricter policies for granting stir-shaken authorizations and increasing enforcement of those policies. The further notice would propose to address improper stir-shaken attestation practices by codifying standards, setting out requirements to satisfy the attestation level criteria, and codifying prohibitions on improper attestations that are implicit in the stir-shaken standards. Additionally, the further notice would propose to close stir-shaken implementation loopholes by clarifying definitions that govern providers' implementation obligations, repealing at least one of the 2 remaining undue hardship extensions, and advancing steps to preserve authentication information throughout the call path. In addition to these proposed measures, the further notice would seek comment on how the proposals would serve to deter illegal calls that enter the United States from abroad, and would propose other changes to streamline the Commission's existing stir-shaken caller ID authentication rules. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Thank you. Stopping illegal robocalls has been a bipartisan priority at the FCC for years, and today's item reflects that continued commitment. This proceeding tightens the standards to know the carriers you do business with, raises the bar for how calls are verified and labeled, and closes loopholes that bad actors have exploited for years to evade accountability. With this action, we are sending a clear message that every carrier in the call chain bears responsibility for the traffic it touches. But as we strengthen these rules, we must also be clear about who they're aimed at. After we voted on the Know Your Customer robocall NPRM last month, I noticed growing concern online about what these new vetting requirements would mean for the privacy of everyday consumers. People wanted to know whether buying a prepaid phone or activating a prepaid line would require, for the first time, government-issued ID. That concern is understandable, and it deserves a clear answer. As the Commission's robocall enforcement efforts expand across authentication, numbering, and provider accountability, we have an obligation to be clear that these rules target the business relationships between carriers and do not erode consumer privacy. That is why I worked with the Chairman's office to incorporate language in today's item, making that crucial clarification more explicit. And I will be watching closely as implementation proceeds on these robocall items to make sure that remains the case. I want to thank Chairman Carr for working with my office on that clarifying edit and the Wireline Competition Bureau for their work on this item. These unlawful robocalls are how scammers reach the most vulnerable consumers, drain bank accounts, and erode trust in our communications net systems. I'm glad we're doing that work to help put a stop to them, and I am pleased to support this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now hear from Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. In 2019, Congress enacted the Pallone-Thune Traced Act to provide an agile tool that can be used to combat robocalling abuses as technologies and methodologies of transmitting these pernicious calls evolve. A key component of that law required the speedy implementation of stir-shaken caller ID authentication technologies to protect consumers. Pursuant to the Commission's implementation of the Traced Act, providers have now been deploying caller ID authentication technologies for roughly 5 years. Today's item marks an appropriate moment to assess both the progress that has been made as well as challenges that remain in eliminating spoofing and scam calls. The record to date makes clear that despite substantial efforts by both industry and the Commission, continued vigilance is required to prevent scammers from exploiting weaknesses in our communications ecosystem. Adherence to the stir-shaken framework has at times been inconsistent, producing uneven results that undermine consumer trust in verified calls and give scammers the space to continue their unlawful operations. Strengthening implementation of these authentication measures is important in its own right, but it's especially important as the Commission considers how best to build upon this framework to combat illegal robocalls at every stage of the call path. I look forward to reviewing the record in this proceeding to evaluate how we can further strengthen trust in our communications networks while maintaining a regulatory environment that promotes innovation and investment. I thank the Wireline Competition Bureau for its excellent work on this item.
Well, thanks, Commissioners. Over the past year or so, the FCC has adopted new tactics in our long-running effort to end the scourge of illegal robocalls. We're focused on hardening every portion of the call path against bad actor scammers. Today's item is another example of that approach. For one, we're seeking comment on ways to ensure providers are taking reasonable steps to know their customers and upstream providers. This will help prevent many bad actor businesses from accessing the network in the first place. For another, we're proposing that carriers respond much more quickly to traceback requests. This will prevent many bad actors from staying on the networks once they get there in the first place. And for still another, we're seeking comment on requiring carriers to cooperate fully with law enforcement and industry efforts to stop illegal robocalls before they ever reach a consumer's phone. Taken together, these steps would strengthen our robocall mitigation framework by driving greater transparency and more meaningful accountability from providers. At the end of the day, stopping illegal robocalls is going to require everyone in the ecosystem to do their part and be held accountable for the traffic that they allow on the network. For their great work on the item, I want to thank the bureaus and the teams that worked on this, in particular Chief Calashone, Kara Voth, Jody May, Chris Laughlin, Mason Sheffa, John Menges, Mary Wolf, Aaron Garza, Michael Scott, Dan Stepanich, and Jonathan Lecter, and thanks as well to my Commission colleagues, Commissioner Gomez, Commissioner Trusty, for their great ideas and edits on this one. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trusty?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 2 on your agenda is titled Streamlining Broadband Data Processes and Reducing Unnecessary Regulatory Burdens, and was presented by the Broadband Data Task Force. Jonathan McCormick, co-chair of the Broadband Data Task Force, will give the introduction.
Thanks. Co-chair McCormick, when you are ready. We believe in very formal titles around here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Broadband Data Task Force is pleased to present for your consideration a report in order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that, if adopted, would take several steps to streamline and improve the FCC's broadband data collection. I would like to thank our colleagues in various bureaus and offices throughout the Commission for their hard work on this item, including the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Office of Engineering and Technology, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Space Bureau, the Office of General Counsel, and the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. Very much a team effort. Seated at the table with me are Ed Barthelme, co-chair of the Broadband Data Task Force and also chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and Jamil Kadre, legal advisor on the Broadband Data Task Force, who will now present the item.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today's report in order and further notice of proposed rulemaking would streamline the audits and verifications, improve challenge processes, and reduce regulatory burdens that add costs without a corresponding benefit to the quality of provider-reported data, all while ensuring that the data filed in the broadband data collection and depicted in the National Broadband Map is accurate. Specifically, the report in order aligns reporting requirements for broadband availability and subscription data, streamlines the Fabric challenge process by eliminating the requirement that providers be notified of and allowed to respond to Fabric challenges during the Fabric development cycle, simplifies verification and audit processes, and makes certain ministerial changes to the broadband data collection rules to increase clarity. The further notice of proposed rulemaking seeks to further alleviate unnecessary regulatory burdens on service providers and challenge process participants by exploring approaches to simplify and streamline the coverage restoration process, eliminate requirements to submit grandfathered data, establish voluntary best practices for data retention, mobile verification and audit process improvements, such as incorporating the use of data collected using drones, and other challenge process improvements. The Broadband Data Task Force recommends the adoption of the item and requests editorial privileges to make technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
When the FCC took on the enormous task of developing a new national broadband map, it endeavored not only to create the map, but also to continue to improve its accuracy and its utility over time. The iterative process has genuinely made the map better, but there's still imperfections. As we continue to use the map to inform our policy decisions, we must be honest about the map's limitations and build in processes to catch and correct errors before they compound. Today's item reflects meaningful progress in improving the map and our challenge process. These improvements will support federal, state, local, and tribal partners working to ensure that connectivity reaches the communities that need it the most. Our hope of closing the digital divide begins with an understanding of which parts of our country are unserved and underserved, so I'm happy to see us make progress toward that goal. Thank you to the Broadband Data Task Force for your work on this item and your ongoing work on the broadband map.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. A few years before joining the Commission, I was on the staff of the Senate Commerce Committee, where I worked on the development and passage of the Broadband Data Act. And so I understand the importance of accurate broadband maps to effective policymaking and how far the National Broadband Map has come in recent years. Notwithstanding tremendous congressional efforts, additional work remains to ensure the map reaches its full potential. From conversations with providers in Alaska and Kansas to events hosted by CCA, NTCA, and WTA, to meetings right here at the Commission, I continue to hear about the need to improve the national broadband map and streamline the processes for updating and challenging the data to ensure its continued accuracy. Accordingly, I welcome today's item, which takes targeted steps to improve mapping data in the near term, while also seeking comment on broader reforms to the update and challenge processes. I encourage robust input on these questions from the full range of stakeholders, including providers, federal and state governments, consumers, and others with a vested interest in the success of the national broadband map. I thank the Broadband Data Task Force and all the staff across the relevant bureaus for their hard work on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Earlier this week, the FCC released an updated version of the National Broadband Map. This is version 8.0 by my count. This new map highlights the significant progress that providers have continued to make, expanding high-speed internet access across the country. More Americans than ever have access to faster and more reliable broadband service, particularly in rural communities that for too long were left stuck on the wrong side of the digital divide. Notably, even if you just look at terrestrial fixed services alone, the map shows that more than 96%, or 112 million locations, have access to high-speed 100/20 megabits per second service. And last year alone, more than 2 million new locations gained access to such services. Today, only 4.4 million locations lack access to that type of internet service, representing a 64% decrease from the inaugural map all the way back in June of 2002. On the mobile side, almost 97% of locations now have access to mobile 5G services, and none of this counts the many new connections that are now powered by next-gen satellite services. At the same time, of course, we know there is more work to be done. That's why today's item focuses not just on improving the quality of the data reflected in the map, but also on improving the process itself. Specifically, we're taking common sense steps to streamline the broadband data collection process, to reduce unnecessary regulatory burdens, and make the challenge and verification processes much easier for stakeholders to participate in. And these steps will help ensure that the FCC's map continues to get better and better. Thanks again to the entire team that worked on this, particularly Jonathan McCormick, Ed Bartholomew, Jamil Kadre, Stephen Kaufman, Janet Moran, Joy Ragsdale, Sayuri Rajapakse, Matthew Warner, Michael Ray, Simon Soleimani, Barbara Pavan, and Robert Accaccio for their great work. It has my support, and with that, we will turn to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trustee?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 3 on your agenda is titled Modernizing the Disaster Information Reporting System, DIRS, and will be presented by the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Zenji Nakazawa, Bureau Chief, will give the introduction.
Late breaking news.
Austin Randazzo.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a third report in order that would take steps to modernize the Disaster Information Reporting System, or DIRS. I'd like to thank the Bureau and office staff who worked on this item. Seated with me at the table are Leon Kenworthy, Chief of the Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division, and Jim Zagoras, an attorney advisor in the division, who will present the third report in order.
Thank you, Deputy Bureau Chief Randazzo. Good morning, Chairman Carr and Commissioners. This third report in order would modernize the FCC's Disaster Information Reporting System, DIRS, by making the communications infrastructure status information it collects more useful to emergency managers while eliminating unnecessary reporting burdens for communication service providers. The third report in order would allow providers to report infrastructure status information using a single dynamic form instead of 10 distinct forms. It would also create a one-click option that reporting providers can use when there is no change in their network's status from the prior day's DERS report. The third report in order would also eliminate unnecessary fields in worksheets to request only the information that is most important for emergency response. It also eliminates the requirement for service providers to file a final report 24 hours after DERS is deactivated and exempts providers that do not own or operate their own facilities or infrastructure from filing in DERS. To better support the needs of emergency managers during disasters, the third report in order would augment providers' ability to voluntarily report the precise location of facilities affected by disasters and corresponding information about effects on network coverage. Further, the third report in order would require public safety network, voice and broadband network operators, such as FirstNet, to report on the status of their public safety network infrastructure. The Bureau recommends adoption of this third report in order and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
The Commission adopted the Disaster Information Reporting System to do our part to support public safety during and after major disasters. DERS allows us to collect information about the status of communications infrastructure and service restoration during emergencies and to share it with federal, state, local, and tribal emergency management agencies. Over time, we have refined DERS reporting requirements to make them easier and more efficient, and so we are doing that again today. Thank you to the Office of the Chairman for incorporating my edits, especially with regard to the First Responder Network Authority, and thank you to the Bureau for your work on this important issue.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now hear from Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. I recently traveled to Louisiana to speak with a group of rural telecommunications providers about the persistent challenges of deploying broadband in hard-to-reach parts of the country. Given the location of the event in downtown New Orleans, our discussion also touched on the importance of network resilience and lessons learned following the massive flooding caused by Hurricane Katrina and the devastating impact it had on communications networks and other critical infrastructure. That tragedy marked a turning point in emergency preparedness, response, and coordination, sparking policy reforms, including the creation of the Disaster Information Reporting System. At its core, DERS helps to provide situational awareness about the operational status of communications networks during emergencies and natural disasters. But as this proceeding has demonstrated, there is a need to modernize this system so that providers can submit accurate and timely information without taking on additional reporting or administrative requirements that have proven to be unnecessary to disaster response and recovery efforts. Today's item streamlines the DERS reporting process by eliminating worksheets, information fields, and other requirements that are outdated and non-essential, while improving the online interface and incorporating a more user-friendly filing option during emergencies. In addition to making DERS easier to use, this item will provide federal, state, and local officials with a more precise and comprehensive understanding of network availability in the aftermath of a disaster, so that they can help restore connectivity when communities need it most. When providers should be focused on the maintenance and restoration of communication services, they should be met with a simple and functional system that's easy to navigate, and this third report in order helps to achieve that objective. I thank the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for their thoughtful work on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Later this week, I'll be heading back to western North Carolina, where Hurricane Helene brought catastrophic flooding and mudslides in September of 2024, devastating communities. In January of 2025, in my first trip out of D.C. after becoming chair, I had a chance to see that destruction firsthand and meet with first responders, providers, and residents that were working around the clock to restore service and rebuild. One thing that stood out to me in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene was how many resources were still being tied up by outdated paperwork filing requirements. In the middle of a disaster recovery effort, the FCC should be focused on helping crews reconnect communities, allowing them to clear barriers that slow down recovery efforts. Limited manpower shouldn't be spent on unnecessary red tape. That's why I'm pleased we're taking action today to modernize the FCC's disaster reporting system in a way that reduces burdens while still ensuring that we have the accurate, up-to-date information on service and restoration efforts that we need. This will be especially important for small, rural providers that may already be stretched pretty thin during times of emergency. For all the great work on the item, I want to thank the Bureau and the teams that labored on this one in public safety, including Ryan Hedgepeth, Leon Kenworthy, Zenji Nakazawa, Austin Randazzo, Gene Stockman, James Wiley, and James Zaguris. And thanks again to my colleagues for their great and helpful ideas and edits on this one. With that, we'll turn to a vote, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trustee.
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 4 on your agenda is titled Launching High Cost Program Initiative and will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau, and Joseph Calachone, Bureau Chief, will give the introduction.
Thanks. Chief, when you're ready, please proceed.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a notice of proposed rulemaking that seeks comment on updating our high-cost program rules to ensure that Universal Service Fund resources are spent efficiently and are directed to the areas where they are needed most. I'd like to thank the Bureau team and our colleagues around the Commission for their hard work on this item. With me at the table are Brian Boyle, Chief of the Telecommunications Access Policy Division, Jesse Jackman, Deputy Chief of the Division, and Quan Nguyen, Attorney Advisor in the Division, who will now present the item.
Thank you, Joseph. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, if adopted, will seek comment on several issues that will help to determine the future of high-cost program support in certain areas of the country, namely those areas receiving funding through the Connect America Fund Broadband Loop Support, High-Cost Loop Support, ACAM-1, Revise ACAM-1, and ACAM-2 mechanisms. First, the item seeks comment on updating the mechanisms to align with the current landscape, establishing a new modernized fixed support mechanism, or maintaining the status quo for CAF-BLS and HCLS support mechanisms, and allowing the ACAM support mechanisms to expire. Second, the item seeks comment on what support, if any, is necessary in areas where a support recipient already provides services or where a competitor already provides or will provide such service through an enforceable commitment through, for example, NTIA's BEAD program. The item also seeks comment on how the emergence of low Earth satellite service should impact future high-cost support. Third, the item seeks comment on what deployment obligations would be appropriate for recipients of legacy support who currently do not have any deployment obligations or who receive support from programs that will sunset by the end of 2028, and whether those programs should be extended beyond their current sunset dates. Finally, the item seeks comment on what role the USF can play in encouraging the IP transition while also ensuring that our limited USF resources are spent in an efficient manner. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Today, we open a proceeding that's important to ensure that our universal service policies remain equal to the moment. For decades, the high-cost program has helped connect Americans living in the most remote parts of the country. The communications landscape, however, has changed dramatically, both in the technologies available and in the demands placed upon modern networks. As we look ahead, one reality is clear. Participating fully in the AI-driven economy will require far more than baseline broadband. Artificial intelligence applications depend on consistent, low-latency, high-capacity connections. That means this proceeding must take a hard, evidence-based look at where non-terrestrial broadband solutions are sufficient and where they are not. Satellite broadband has expanded rapidly and represents an important piece of the connectivity puzzle, particularly for some of the most geographically challenging areas. But we must evaluate with rigor whether these services can reliably support the performance needed for advanced applications, including AI workloads, telehealth, precision agriculture, and other latency and capacity-sensitive uses. This NPRM asks the right questions about how to modernize legacy mechanisms, how to align federal programs, and how to avoid inefficient duplication of support. But it also recognizes that our policy decisions must rest on facts, on accurate broadband availability data, on transparent performance metrics, and on a clear understanding of what next-generation services demand from the networks that carry them. Our goal is straightforward: to ensure that every community, regardless of geography, has access to broadband that is not only good enough today, but resilient and robust enough to sustain economic opportunity in the AI era. I look forward to building a record that helps us meet that obligation with clarity, precision, and responsibility. Thank you to the chairman for working with me on edits, and thank you to the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Broadband Data Task Force for your professionalism and unwavering commitment to advancing connectivity and equity through this important proceeding.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now hear comments from Commissioner Trustee.
Thank you. 15 years ago, the FCC began requiring that high-cost universal service support be directed toward investment in modern broadband-capable networks. The Commission recognized that doing so would help accelerate broadband deployment to unserved and underserved communities across the country. Since then, the Commission's efforts have been complemented by other federal initiatives, including BEAD, as well as state broadband deployment programs and substantial private sector investment in advanced communications infrastructure. For decades, achieving universal broadband connectivity has been a national priority. But as networks evolve and the communications marketplace continues its transition to all IP technologies, we must once again evaluate the future role of the Commission's high-cost support mechanisms. This assessment is particularly timely as Congress considers broader universal service reform and as certain high-cost programs approach expiration. The issues raised by the IP transition also underscore the need to begin this conversation now. Looking ahead, it's important that we carefully consider where support will still be needed and how it can be targeted most effectively. Only by doing so can we remain responsible stewards of universal service funds while continuing to fulfill Section 254's mandate to preserve and advance universal service. The broad inquiry we initiate today reflects the range of important questions surrounding the future of high-cost support. How should the Commission address any remaining deployment gaps? What role should support play in helping providers manage ongoing operations and maintenance costs and ensuring reasonably comparable rates in rural areas? How should we account for the investments necessary to keep rural networks resilient and secure? And how can we help ensure that rural communities are positioned to participate fully in the opportunities presented by emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence? I look forward to working with my colleagues, Commission staff, and industry, consumer, and government stakeholders as we consider the Commission's next steps in this area. And I thank the Wireline Competition Bureau for its work on this important item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. The FCC's high-cost programs play a key role in helping to close the digital divide and expand connectivity for millions of Americans, especially in rural communities. I've seen firsthand examples of how these builds can transform a community by providing next-gen connectivity to homes and businesses. In the coming months and years, some of the FCC's existing legacy programs are set to sunset as a matter of law, and others are reaching important transition points. So now's a good time to make sure that we have a plan for those and similar programs. That way we can ensure that these programs keep pace with the times and continue to deliver great results for the American people. Today's item takes an important step in that direction So I look forward to reviewing the record and working with my commission colleagues and all stakeholders to ensure that these programs continue to advance our core mission of ensuring that every American has access to an affordable, high-speed connection. So thanks again to the team for all the great work on this, to Chief Calashone, Brian Boyle, A.J. Burton, Nathan Egan, Lauren Gary, Jesse Jackman, Heidi Lankow, Scott Lively, Koa Nguyen, Ed Bartholomew, Peter, these names are really tripping me up today, Peter Jingaleski, Jonathan McCormick, I think I got that right, and Stephen Rosenberg for all their great work on the item. Again, thanks to my colleagues here on the dais for their great edits and ideas. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trusty?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. And we are moving right through today's agenda, so that's the end of the meeting items for today. At this point, I'll take a break to see if any of my colleagues would like to make any announcements. Interns coming, interns going,
Not yet.
staff coming, staff going.
I have an announcement.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, I want to welcome one of our summer interns, Miss Lily Freemeyer. Thank you for standing so everybody can look at you. Lily is a rising second-year law student at Washington and Lee Law School. She has an undergraduate degree in journalism and political science from the University of Wisconsin. And before law school, she worked at a Washington, D.C.-based public relations firm, interned on Capitol Hill, and spent time in the Wisconsin State House. In her free time, Lily enjoys the outdoors and traveling, going to see live music. She is a D.C. native and an avid Washington Capitals fan. So please join us in welcoming Lily. We're really, really excited to have her. Okay.
I always appreciate someone that likes the outdoors. For me, I like the fluorescent lights of office buildings, try to stay in them as much as I possibly can. I don't have the complexion for the outdoor environment. For my part, I do want to take a moment to recognize someone who has played a very central role in both standing up my office in the first place as chair and is now leaving the commission for greener pastures in the private sector. But she's back today, Callie Coker. Callie, you got to do the standing up thing. Thank you so much. Callie began her career here at the FCC in 2019 as an honors attorney in the Wireline Bureau, and she quickly distinguished herself there. In 2022, she moved into the front office of the Bureau, where she advised the Bureau Chief on universal service, national security, and a range of broadband matters. When we began building the team in the chairman's office, Callie was already on our radar as someone with deep institutional knowledge and sound judgment. So she joined our team in the chair's office back in 2025, and she very quickly became an essential part of our everyday work on a range of different matters. But Callie obviously rose from an honors attorney to the chairman's office, all through her talent and dedication and her commitment to public service. So we are grateful for everything, Callie, that you contributed here in the building, and we wish you all the best in this next chapter. Thanks. And with that, Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next date for the Commission's monthly agenda meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, June 25th, 2026.
Great. Until then, we stand adjourned.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start our chairman's press conference momentarily, so if you could please take any conversations outside, I'd greatly appreciate it. And as a reminder, if the press could just identify your name and outlet, we'll really appreciate it. And with that, I'll hand it off to the chairman. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much. Good to see everybody again. We've had another busy, productive run here at the FCC. I want to highlight a couple of big wins since we last had a chance to meet together. Last week was actually one of the more significant decisions that the FCC made. We approved a transaction that moves a lot of spectrum into a 5G, 6G provider and a lot of spectrum into the hands of another provider that can use it for new direct-to-cell technologies. Roughly $40 billion worth of deals that were approved by the FCC. And it really encapsulates a lot of the policy work that we're doing here at the FCC. One, we want our mobile wireless providers to be lighting up spectrum and putting it to use for the American people, not just sitting on the spectrum. And so a big chunk of that spectrum went to AT&T. They're already lighting it up pursuant to leases, and they're seeing 5G speeds increase by up to 80% in the areas where they've already lit that spectrum up. And then the other chunk of spectrum goes to Starlink, and they're going to use it in part for this new direct-to-cell technology. So a lot of people are familiar with satellite connectivity today, where you can have high-speed connection to a small dish, and people are familiar with old satellite connectivity to a satellite phone that's not really high-speed service, but we now have the capacity to combine that. So right to your smartphone, you're going to be able to get high-speed internet connectivity wherever you are in the U.S., and America is going to lead the way. And President Trump's been clear that he wants U.S. technology companies to lead the world, and that transaction last week alone sets the U.S. to be successful there. The work we're doing is already delivering results. So we're seeing speeds on the mobile wireless side were up something like 50% last year alone. And we're seeing prices continuing to decline on connectivity services as well. Prices on your typical unlimited plan were down over 10%. Also, since we last talked, I had a chance to get down to Fort Bragg with Secretary of the Army Driscoll, and we held a exercise down there. We were going over lots of different issues, including drone and counter-drone technologies. It was a really productive meeting. And as I indicated, I'll be back in North Carolina later this week, acknowledging a lot of the recovery effort that's taken place down there after Hurricane Helene. There's been a lot of work across the Trump administration to help restore both connectivity, but frankly, the communities more broadly. So I look forward to getting back down there and seeing how that work is going. And with that, we're happy to open it up to questions.
Thank you. Nancy Skull, I'm writing for Washingtonian Magazine. A bit of a softball for you, but you have a deep and longstanding interest in climbing towers, right? I'm told that you've even trained up to do it safely. Can you explain a little bit why it's something you spend time and attention on?
Yeah, I started doing this probably right when I got on the commission itself back in 2017, and we talked a lot then about permitting reform and making it easier for broadband builders to get the job done. And one of the things that I found is that if you cut out the dozen layers of lawyers and lobbyists and get outside the Beltway and meet directly with the women and men that actually climb the towers, that do this work, and you ask them what's jamming you up, you get really good, interesting ideas. And so part of it was hearing directly from them about reforms, but also, America's tower crews are just the best of the best. They're salt of the earth people, and I think highlighting their work, we always need more jobs in this space. We can go out and highlight the work that they're doing. We help stand up various apprenticeship programs to draw people into it. And it's also just a lot of fun to get up in the air with a tower crew. Although, as I said, I think maybe last month, every time I climb a tower, I'm older than the last time I climbed a tower, so there may come a point at which I can't do that anymore. But for now, I really enjoy getting out there, getting up in the air, and hope to get to continue to do it.
Just quick, any plans to go any higher?
Well, unfortunately or unfortunately, 2,000 feet is basically the cap for broadcast towers in this country, so we've topped out in terms of that. But we'll see. Maybe we'll talk to some of the satellite providers and see if we can go a little bit higher. I'm game. Maybe give Jared Isaacman a run for his money.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Kelsey Griffiths with Bloomberg News. I wanted to ask about the open investigation into Comcast diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Should we expect to see a licensing action similar to the one that you took against Disney's ABC licenses applied to Comcast NBC stations? If not, what would you say is the difference in behavior that you've observed between ABC and NBC?
Yeah, no news to break on the Comcast front. The investigation into Disney, which I think we talked a lot about at the last press conference, had moved a lot further along in terms of the investigatory and enforcement steps that we'd been taking. The Disney matter, we'd gone through 2 rounds of discovery and document production. We'd had evidence that was coming in. As I think I indicated last month, we started the proceeding on Disney because there was reporting that indicated, and again, I got to be careful because Disney has every right to put their evidence in. We've not made any final decision. They have their own position, I'm sure, but there's at least evidence that was indicating that Disney had created racially segregated spaces inside the company. There's evidence indicating that potentially that they were hiring based on race and gender and protected characteristics. They were compensating, they were promoting, and then again, they had workplace opportunities that were different. And if the evidence does end up establishing that, that's a pretty serious issue. And you see it not just here at the FCC, but the EEOC and DOJ taking action. But we move forward based on just where we were in the Disney case. The Comcast one just hasn't proceeded as far at this point, and we just, we marshal resources and make decisions about where to put them.
Thanks for doing this, Chairman. Sean Moran from Breitbart News. The FCC Media Bureau is seeking comment on feedback about updating television ratings, to warn parents about controversial topics such as gender identity and things of that ilk. What sort of feedback has the agency received thus far?
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting. From what I've seen, we've gotten pretty robust feedback and comment. The comment cycle itself, I think, closes later this week, and so once that closes, we'll be able to get our hands better around the issue. But if you go back, Congress passed a law because they wanted parents to be informed about the types of TV programming that their children get. And at the time, there was a lot of focus on violent programming, but the rating system was designed to cover a lot of different issues that parents care about. And increasingly, there's been concern raised about some of the transgender content that has been put in children's television programming. And so one of the ideas that's been raised is, should the TV ratings board start to include labels that identify that type of programming in children's programming pursuant to the law and the framework that Congress passed. I think even people that are on different sides of issues as a general matter, I think they all agree fundamentally parents should be informed and parents should make the decision, not the government for them. But do parents have the information that they need to truly make those informed decisions? And that's what this is ultimately about. It's empowering parents in light of the challenges that they face today in terms of deciphering what types of programs are okay for their children in their view.
Josh Kosman, Capitol Forum. Chair, when do you think we might see a TV broadband spectrum sale?
Well, we're running a couple of different efforts right now with respect to broadcasters. Obviously, we've been under active consideration on various ownership reforms, which I've talked about in terms of how that's consistent with some North Star policies I have in this area. In terms of more flexibility with respect to the spectrum that broadcasters own, at the end of the day, as you folks here know, broadcasters have 6 megahertz channels. Originally, they got that spectrum for free, and that ultimately ties back into a broader discussion of the public interest standard and some of the obligations there. One thing that we're looking at is giving them greater flexibility with respect to their own spectrum that they own today by facilitating this transition, what we call ATSC 3.0, where there's this new technology broadcasters can use to take their existing spectrum that they still own and do more things with it, including data casting. So for instance, if you have a fleet of connected vehicles and you want to update a mapping technology, that disseminating that update over traditional broadcast TV spectrum might be an efficient way to do that. We did do, obviously, a spectrum auction of broadcast spectrum a number of years ago. There's been some thought about doing another one. There's also requests that are in. I think a petition came in recently asking for us to look at enabling 5G, 6G. I mean, ultimately, whether it's 3.0 or 5G, 6G, or another auction, we haven't sort of picked a specific lane on that one, but we are pretty far down the path at looking at greater flexibility through this transition to 3.0.
Chairman Ted Johnson from Deadline. There have been a lot of accusations that your decisions have been for partisan purposes, that you're doing the president's bidding. Have you, first of all, does that concern you? And have you given thought to maybe pulling back on visits to Mar-a-Lago or your interactions with the president, or even your social media president, to try to dispel that perception?
I can assure you that I will not be visiting Mar-a-Lago this summer because Mar-a-Lago closes for the summer. So at least for the next couple of months, you can rest assured that I will not be there. I mean, look, we've been very clear from the get-go about the agenda that we're running, and I've been clear with the American people about the top priorities. We are expanding rural broadband. We're giving boost to America's space economy. We're cutting red tape and permitting reform, I think the results speak for themselves. Internet speeds are up, prices are down, and we're going to continue to pursue a really bold, aggressive agenda. And my whole approach to this job is you really can't get deterred by the headlines, I used to say, of New York Times or of Deadline, either about different people that want to slow this agenda down. We're just going to keep rolling regardless of what the headlines of the moment are, because what we're doing really matters. Again, last week, probably one of the most significant things we've done at the FCC, which was moving spectrum into the hands of a 5G, 6G provider, setting the country up for leadership in this next-gen technology direct-to-device. But you don't see the headlines about this. You guys just want, to see another fight with Jimmy Kimmel. But we're going to continue to sort of, tend to our knitting on those issues. And, whatever the headlines are, they are. But we're going to be full steam ahead.
But how about weighing in on social media on issues that aren't related to the FCC?
I'm not tracking.
I've seen posts where you weigh in on issues that aren't necessarily related to the FCC.
If you have a specific one, I'm happy to address it. But
next time.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, Chairman Carr, Dave Shepardson from Reuters. I want to ask you about ABC's filing on The View. They said that the FCC about 2 decades ago had awarded it a bona fide news exemption for the program. Does the FCC need to formally retract that? Do you believe that was still in effect prior to the January order I think it was from the Media Bureau? And can you speak sort of more generally to this idea that that order and other actions by the commission are impinging on the free speech rights of Disney, of Paramount, CBS, NBC, and sort of this broader suggestion that all the efforts on early renewals of licenses are affecting the free speech rights of the broadcasters?
So Disney is taking the position that the TV program The View is a bona fide news program. And the reason for that is that Congress long ago passed a law that said, in essence, Congress didn't want media gatekeepers to be deciding the outcomes of elections. So they put a framework in place that said, if you're going to be a broadcaster and have on a legally qualified candidate for office, you have to provide equal opportunities to all other legally qualified candidates. And it was a position and a provision that promotes more speech, not less. It doesn't say that you're prohibited from having anybody on. In fact, it encourages more speech, more debate, more choice for voters. There's an exception to that if you are what's called a bona fide news interview program. One of the tests the FCC has laid out over the years for deciding that is whether you are having candidates on, having people on for the newsworthiness as a general matter, or are you doing so to promote partisan political goals? And so that's something that's going to be before the FCC. Many, many years ago, there was a letter, it wasn't an FCC ruling, a letter that Disney got related to The View, but the letter itself says that the decision is based on the record at the time. This was, a decade plus ago at this point. And obviously, if there's new facts, new circumstances, new ways that shows are being run, a letter based on the contours of a program that existed many, many years ago, isn't necessarily binding precedent for a show that exists today. Most fundamentally, what Disney's saying in their filing is they're going really, in essence, at the heart of Congress's decision to have an equal time provision. And their view is somehow that it's, a constraint on speech. But again, even if you're not a bona fide news program and you have to comply with this, the program itself doesn't even have to have both candidates on. It's simply the TV station that has the obligation to provide comparable time and placement to other legally qualified candidates. And again, the Supreme Court has been very clear that the unique regulatory framework that applies to broadcasters and broadcasters alone, again, because they got this spectrum for free, the government picks winners and losers by giving them a license and denying it to others, because that unique regulatory framework, public interest obligations like that are both entirely lawful and consistent with the First Amendment and consistent with the free speech rights of broadcasters. So we're going to take a look at the petition that they filed, run the normal course process on it, and we'll see where things go from there.
So you haven't decided whether The View should still be considered a bona fide news program, or you just have to decide whether to respond, how to respond to the petition?
Well, we're going to look at the petition and go through. I mean, what we said when we issued a public notice in January of this year on this issue is that, there's no show in its current format that had come to the FCC and made the demonstration that it's a bona fide news program. Disney made the choice to make this filing and submit it at the FCC. We now have it, and we're going to go through it and ultimately reach a decision on it.
Hi, Chairman Carr. Diego Munoz from Punchbowl. Wanted to ask you about the FCC's national security agenda, particularly on China. So the FCC expanded the covered list, drones, routers, at the same time that many agencies have sort of paused a lot of their China actions in the lead up to the summit. Has the administration signaled at all that it wants the FCC to slow down on some of these more hawkish measures? And if not, where do you plan on going next?
Well, I think it's important to unpack it. What we've been doing at the FCC is addressing foreign countries, foreign adversary nations, bad actors based abroad as a general matter. A lot of the specific actions that the FCC has taken that people attribute to the FCC alone are actually, we're simply implementing decisions that were made by a much broader group of traditionally executive branch national security agencies. So for instance, when the FCC, around the beginning of this year, put in place a ban on all foreign-produced drones, so not just any one country, but foreign-produced drones, that was based on a national security determination that was given to us publicly in our document from executive branch agencies. So we're implementing an executive branch decision. Our recent decision on routers was the exact same process. This was a decision reached inside the White House in terms of the national security agencies, and the exemptions to that are driven not by us. So if you want an exemption from the drone ban or the router ban, you go to Department of Homeland Security or the Department of War. They make the decision. So I think when people look at these decisions coming from the FCC, it can look from a headline level that we are doing this, of our own volition. But the reality is the way a lot of this national security stuff works, this is a decision made by the administration, and we're merely implementing that. In fact, we don't have a choice when we get a national security determination to implement it. In terms of where we go, we're going to continue a lot of these work streams. We've been working on this proceeding called Bad Labs, for instance, where most people don't know this, but every piece of electronics that you have has to go through an FCC approval process, and something like 75% of that testing was taking place in labs in China. And even just as an onshoring and jobs matter, we want to make sure that there's labs here in the U.S. that are able to approve and work through that. So we're going to continue to work there. Subsea cables is another area that we care a lot about in the building. We want to promote safe, secure, resilient subsea cables that are being built all across the world. Again, not just a China issue there. So we have a pretty robust agenda there, and we're going to keep running. But again, it's not sort of country specific. It's more looking broadly at foreign adversaries and bad actors abroad.
Thank you, Chairman. Philip Bathy with Communications Daily. Last week, Senator Tom Cotton and Representative Kustoff sent a letter urging the Commission to issue a final order on the cell phone jamming in prisons rule. Just wondering what the timeline when that final order might come and what changes might there be from the NPRM.
Yeah, well, obviously, Senator Cotton and Rep. Kustoff have been doing great work promoting this issue. So this is an issue that, unfortunately, is pervasive all across the country. You have prisons and jails where people are bringing contraband cell phones in, they're smuggling it in, they're throwing them over the fences, they're flying them in with drones. It's a real threat, not just inside prisons, but also it enables people to call in hits, to order kidnappings, to run drug operations from inside prisons. There's a lot of tools that are being brought to bear to try to stop that. One tool that the federal government has denied state and local prisons and jails from using for years has been sort of targeted jamming technologies. So we have started a rulemaking to look at making sure that federal law isn't a prohibition to state and local. Now, federal entities, so Bureau of Prisons and otherwise, are not prohibited by any FCC rule or statute from authorizing jamming technologies, but state and local prisons have. So I hope to be able to move forward on that, hopefully sometime this year. I don't think it's sort of imminent in the next month or two, but I hope we can get to an order on that this year, because ultimately it's sort of a national security issue.
Chairman Ariel Hickson with MS Now. What are your comments regarding concerns over the CNN and CBS merger and how that's going to affect content moving forward, especially as we consider the First Amendment?
Well, I don't think the government should, block that proceeding, or state governments block that proceeding. You see a lot of discussion maybe at sort of state antitrust levels based apparently on their agreement or disagreement with the content that would be on there. This is not a transaction that directly is going to come before the FCC because it's a cable property and doesn't involve broadcast licenses. There's going to be a small piece for the FCC. There are some foreign investment or foreign dollars that are involved in being invested in CBS to complete the purchase. And so we are running regular course process on that. So we put out a public notice to seek comment on that foreign investment. My understanding is there's a role for CFIUS, which does a lot of national security reviews for that. And then we'll ultimately make an up or down decision on that foreign investment. But the transaction itself isn't going to come before the FC other than that foreign ownership piece. So, good. Okay, thanks. We'll see you guys again next time. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. And with this, I'll hand it off to my colleague Will for the Bureau press conference.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everybody. So as Katie said, we're going to go through the items adopted on the meeting today by the Bureau. So I'm going to do the first item and the fourth item together because they're both the Wireline Bureau, rather than make Joseph come up and back multiple times. So do we have any questions on the Know-Your-Upstream-Provider item and or the high-cost item? Tom Daly?
Yes, just wondering.
Hold up one second. Let me just.
Got it.
Thank you, though.
Hi there.
Just wondering if for the USF NPRM, does it incorporate any changes sought by SpaceX?
SpaceX did put a lot of interesting ideas into the record. However, the item teed up like broad questions without making any predeterminations on like specifics or binding us to any particular direction at this point. It kicks off the substantive debate that will happen in the comment cycle, and SpaceX will take those comments into consideration then.
So nothing yet, but waiting for the comment cycle to go through, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, the comment cycle only begins when it's released.
Understood.
Any other questions on either of these items?
I guess just following up, so is there the, I thought it was.
There we
There
go.
we go. Thank you, Will.
Thank you, of course.
Is there a possibility, I know, and you explained it well, that we haven't even started the comment period yet, but as SpaceX, as Elon Musk went public with his getting rid of the USF fund, is there a possibility that through this process that would be considered as an option?
We haven't actually bulleted that item, eliminating USF. There are a lot of things that are statutorily required for us, and we're just going to focus on the statute. And we read all the comments, we take them all into account, but we are ultimately bound by statute.
So just to be clear then, by statute.
Just turned it off.
Sorry, my bad. So by statute then, just to clarify, it until a certain date, which I think we're still a few years away from, it cannot be eliminated.
Well, it's not by date. Section 254 of the Communications Act lays out certain conditions that all, for universal service available to all Americans, and until that's met, and again, it has to be affordable going forward. So there are a lot of statutory provisions we have to meet.
Anything else on these items? Great. Thank you. Thank you. So next up, the Broadband Data Task Force item. Do you have a question? Any questions on this? Maybe? No? Okay, going once, going twice? All right. Well, we appreciate you, Ed and Jonathan. Thank you very much. So last but not least, we're going to do the public safety item. You have a question? It's Zenji and team. Thank you, sir.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just wondering, can you provide any more details about the changes to the item around FirstNet that were mentioned by Commissioner Gomez?
No, other than, look, when public safety communications go down, whether it's through flood or for wildfire or hurricane, it's very important for public safety, for citizens just to have those communications. So this order, among other things, really expands that by allowing us to collect that information from providers of downed public safety communications. And I think everyone, it's a win-win all around for folks.
Anything else on this item? Great. Thank you all. Okay, thank you. Okay. Thanks, everybody. And with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Gomez. Thank you. Have a good day.
Morning. So if this administration has learned anything over the past year, it is that going to war with the press is a losing strategy. This administration has made no secret of its desire to control what the press says, who gets to say it, and what price journalists must pay for asking the wrong questions. But at every turn, when news organizations have chosen to fight back in court, they have won. The New York Times sued the Pentagon over an unprecedented press policy that required journalists to get government approval before reporting on the military. A federal judge blocked it as unconstitutional, and I have no doubt they will be victorious in their latest suit. NPR and PBS sued after this administration tried to cut off their federal funding for coverage it did not like. In March, a federal judge ruled the executive order was unconstitutional, viewpoint discrimination. And then the Associated Press sued after the White House banned its reporters from events for refusing to use the administration's preferred name for the Gulf of Mexico. A federal judge ruled the White House was engaged in viewpoint discrimination and ordered that access restored. There's a clear pattern here. This administration picks fights with the press, and when the press fights back, the administration loses. And yet losing in court hasn't stopped them. Each time a judge rules against this administration, it finds a new way to come back, a new policy, a new investigation, a new threat. The attacks on the press have not slowed, they have evolved. And that is why this fight is far from over. Last week, I sent a letter to Disney's new CEO documenting the full scope of what this FCC has done to Disney and ABC and making clear that Disney's fight belongs in that same tradition. They should feel confident that their position is valid because the facts, the law, and the public are on their side. What Disney and ABC are facing is not a series of coincidental regulatory actions, but a sustained, coordinated campaign of censorship and control. It started with a baseless defamation lawsuit that led to a short-sighted settlement. That settlement clearly showed that you cannot buy this administration's favor. For the right price, you can only borrow it, and the price always goes up. Since then, this FCC has come after Disney on every front it could find. A news distortion complaint over a 2024 presidential debate, a formal investigation into Disney's diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that stretches our rules far beyond anything that the law allows, a meritless investigation into The View, and now an order demanding early license renewal for all 8 ABC-owned stations, some of which were not up for renewal for nearly 5 years. The investigation into The View deserves special attention. Based on Disney's own filing, the commission selectively pressured ABC affiliates to file paperwork on a candidate appearance, let them off the hook for filing late, then used those filings as evidence against Disney's ABC station. In what seems like a setup, the FCC appears to have set the trap and then pointed to Disney for walking into it. Ultimately, this effort will fail in court, just as every other attempt to use government power to punish the press has failed. I'm encouraged to see Disney choosing courage over capitulation, and I'm confident that resolve will be rewarded in court. Because the courts have made clear time and again that when you fight this administration's attacks on the press, you win. Disney's fight will be no different. Before I take your questions, I want to flag one more development that speaks directly to what I have been describing today. For months, I have urged this FCC to define clearly what it means when it claims a broadcaster is not operating in the public interest, particularly after that standard has been used as a weapon against stations this administration perceives as critics. Rather than doing that through an open rulemaking proceeding that invites public participation and judicial review, this FCC appears poised to issue a public notice that preserves its ability to selectively interpret and enforce standards engineered to justify its targeting of American media. When the government claims the authority to police whether broadcasters are serving the public interest, the American people deserve clear rules developed transparently and applied consistently. An agency that writes its own rules in secret, free from public scrutiny and judicial review, has made clear that accountability was never the point. So instead of issuing a meaningless public notice, the FCC should undertake a formal rulemaking process, seek public comment, and require the full commission to vote on any proposal. An agency that refuses to write clear rules out in the open cannot be trusted to enforce them fairly. The American people are watching, and so am I. Thank you. Any questions? Hi, Kelsey.
Hi, Commissioner Gomez. Thanks for doing this. I wanted to pose a similar question to you that I asked the chairman. Obviously, we've seen Disney's licenses up for review in the last couple weeks, and that was, according to the agency, based on the diversity, equity, and inclusion investigation. I know that we have a similar letter or probe into Comcast now, so I'm curious if you are concerned that that will develop into an escalation of NBC's licenses. And if not, what do you think is different here? Is the standard being applied differently, or have you seen evidence that these companies are behaving differently?
So, I mean, let's be clear. What the investigation into Disney's diversity, equity, and inclusion practices is a pretext, and it's a way to go after them for the content that this administration doesn't like. And so all broadcasters should be concerned about this and should act as Disney is acting, which is with courage and basically protecting their First Amendment rights. The response to the demand that Disney file a petition for declaratory ruling on The View shows you that Disney is standing up for its First Amendment rights.
If I may, a follow-up. Have you spoken with the Disney CEO since you wrote him a letter? I think it was last week.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for doing this, Commissioner. Sean Moran from Broadband News. I was curious about your comments with the robocalls. You kind of voiced concerns about, privacy and those who use prepaid phones and all that. How do you kind of square the circle about, enabling privacy, but at the same time making sure that these sort of devices aren't abused to, further robocalls and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a misinterpretation about the action that the commission took on Know Your Customer. When we are looking at Know Your Customer, they're really looking at these massive robocall entities, not individuals. And so we wanted to make very clear that whatever action we take, we're going to make sure that we look at individuals' privacy as we go forward. And of course, that was a notice of proposed rulemaking. It's not a final action. You don't have to ask a question if you don't want to.
Thanks. No, I have a question or two. But thank you.
Free country.
How concerned are you? The chairman just talked about how used numbers like 96%, 97%, talking about the percentage of the country that's now covered by broadband, that from a technology perspective, we're doing much better, which is nice to hear. How concerned are you that he is seriously taking Elon Musk's suggestion that we don't need a USF fund?
We've made great progress in broadband availability. One thing that's important to keep in mind is, as I said in my remarks earlier to the item, we want to make sure that all communities can fully participate in the AI economy. And what we know is that fiber is the best technology for purposes of, oh gosh, why am I blanking on the word? Capacity and latency. And I want to make sure that we don't declare victory early as we move forward. Satellite is a wonderful service. It is great for where we cannot have other technological solutions, but we want to make sure that consumers everywhere get the type of capacity, the type of latency, the type of service at affordable costs as we are supposed to do under the statute. So we'll ask the questions, and the item asks questions. It does not, for the most part, accept SpaceX's edits, as you will see when it finally comes out.
Okay, I mean, how concerned are you? It seemed like, I mean, the chair Carr, you know, he made those comments just half an hour ago. They were pretty specific, although he didn't go as far as, you know. But I am asking, how concerned are you that he said that today, that seemed to support Starlink's arguments?
Well, again, we have a whole record that's coming, and I'm sure we're going to hear from lots of stakeholders. And we'll see, you know, this is not something the Commission's going to decide today. I will tell you my position all along, and it's been the same position along with BEAD, is that we don't want to set up a policy that leaves communities behind. And I'm concerned that if we rely too much on technologies that aren't going to give them that capacity and that latency, then that's what we're going to be doing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ted Johnson from Deadline. You mentioned the letter that you sent to the Disney CEO. Have you received any response, or either from Josh D'Amaro or from anyone at Disney?
No, they've not written back, although I have to admit I didn't request a response. You know, my goal with the letter was twofold. One was to call out this administration's, because it's not just the FCC, but this administration's actions to silence any viewpoint it doesn't like, but also to encourage Disney and others to stiffen their spine. And I'm glad to see that it seems to be taking effect. And what we are seeing is, in fact, pushback and a masterclass legal brief from Disney that makes very clear how this FCC has been violating its constitutional rights.
One other question, and that is something that Chairman Carr just mentioned, a proceeding on the foreign ownership of a combination of Paramount and Warner Brothers Discovery. Are you concerned about that? Is that something that you think the FCC should potentially try to block the deal just on those grounds?
I have a lot of concerns about the particular petition from Paramount with regard to that transaction, because even though the FCC only has that portion, which is the approval of foreign ownership, what this petition is asking for is very serious. These are not just some foreign companies. These are sovereign wealth funds controlled by countries that are not friendly to the press. And Paramount has requested up to 100% foreign ownership. And as we know, or has been reported, we had some Chinese funding that originally started. They pulled that out because they knew that would draw too much scrutiny. But now Bloomberg has reported that it looks like they're looking at bringing it back in. And Paramount has said, give us up to 100% foreign ownership. It's pretty stunning and very concerning to our national security that we have foreign government controlled. Now, it's indirect ownership, which means under the statute, the FCC can waive the limit of foreign government ownership, but it doesn't mean we should. And so what I called for was a public proceeding, something the Commission will in fact vote on, and for CFIUS and Team Telecom to review it. So we'll see how this goes forward, but I think we should all be very concerned about who is going to be pushing levers that lead to what the viewing public sees and hears.
Dave Shepardson with Reuters. This week, Stephen Colbert is going off the air, and the administration has spoken approvingly of that. Both President Trump CBS parent call it a business decision to not renew his contract. Just a couple weeks ago, President Trump tried to pressure Disney to fire Jimmy Kimmel. What is your sense of sort of the administration's push to try to get programs, especially some of the satirical programs, off the air that they disagree with? And do you think the FCC under Chairman Carr is motivated by an effort to try to silence some of those voices?
Well, it's clear that this administration cannot tolerate any critics, whether it's late night comedies, whether it's The View, and this administration has been very open in their desire to change the media landscape. In fact, as I recall, the White House issued a tweet or some kind of post where they talked about how they have succeeded in changing the media landscape, some of them being the Paramount takeover, or Skydance takeover of Paramount, the firing of Colbert. And so they are using every regulatory lever in their arsenal to go after content, and that is a violation of the First Amendment. And that is why I am so encouraged by Disney pushing back, because if they ultimately take this administration to court, they will win.
And on the Disney front, can I just ask you quickly, Disney in its filing pointed to a prior, letter from the FCC, I think 15 or 20 years ago, that said it was a bona fide news program. What do you think the FCC has to do to unwind that? Do you think it's enough for what the Commission or the Media Bureau did in January, just saying that it did not believe that any programs on the air, were properly qualified, as a bona fide news program in terms of talk shows?
Yeah, the Commission can't just wave a wand and make a prior declaratory ruling disappear. If the Commission wants to do that, then it needs to go through the proper regulatory channels. We've known that they've had this finding that The View is in fact a bona fide news interview program for 24 years, and they have been operating pursuant to that declaratory ruling from the Commission. But it's not really about serving the public interest. It's about targeting content that they don't like. The other thing that we learned from Disney, by the way, besides the fact that we learned that the FCC pressured the other affiliates, not the Disney affiliate, to file, and then use that as evidence against Disney, is that Disney said, hey, we've invited plenty of conservative voices and administration officials, and they've all said no. And I think that's important when we look at how this FCC is going to handle this issue.
Thank you, Commissioner. Philip Athey with Communications Daily. Just wondering if you could provide more details about what type of changes you were pushing in the DERS item today.
The only change that I requested was that we take out the direct order to FirstNet to file, and instead make that an order for AT&T, which is operating the network on behalf of FirstNet.
Why is that an important change for you?
Well, FirstNet is an independent authority housed at the Department of Commerce, and I didn't think it was appropriate for the FCC to directly order them to do that.
Hi, Commissioner Gomez.
Thank you for asking that, by the way. Sorry.
No worries. Ariel Hickson with MS Now. Recently on CNBC, Chairman Carr said that, quote, Democrats are weaponizing the FCC. Do you have any comments on that, especially as some lawmakers have expressed some concerns regarding the push for ABC to file those early license renewals?
I think what we've seen is this FCC and this administration weaponizing the FCC. We have not seen anything like what we are seeing today in terms of going after broadcast content in my lifetime, for sure. And I've been sounding the alarm about the weaponization of the entire executive branch. It's not just the FCC, because this administration does not like any content that criticizes it, and it wants to amplify voices that are friendly to it. So we see the FTC taking action against ad companies that were refusing to put ads on Twitter, for example. And that was entirely about content and about bolstering content that it likes. So the weaponization is actually this administration's.
And any concerns regarding the merger that's happening with CNN and CBS?
Well, my concern with the merger is related to the foreign ownership that we talked about. My concern about media consolidation in general is that what we are losing is a diversity of viewpoints. And I am sure that that is part of the reason why this administration is backing the merger, is because it wants to silence viewpoints with which it disagrees. We want competition. We want diversity of viewpoints. We want viewers and listeners to be able to access the content of their choice, not to be fed a media diet that is simply what this administration wants it to see. So in general, I'm concerned about broadcast consolidation.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, guys.